So this is a beginner-friendly webinar because I've never used SoilGlu, so I'm also learning today. We will discuss the key factors in selecting the right SoilGlu application for different use cases. And then also we will have some expert insights, practical tips, and real-world examples. And today we have Tyson Cable from Prozone, the director himself.
Nice to meet you, everyone. I'm just going to go through what currently is on the website, and then I'm going to go through to a sort of like a flow of thinking for how to approach deciding what product and what sort of application rates and what application method you might want to use depending on your use case. All right, so now I'm just sharing the landing page for our website, and basically I'm just going to go through a quick background around who we are and what we're trying to do in this part of the industry. Basically, Prozyme is an online retailer, and we sell through authorized distributors like Strata Green, and we also have some authorized applicators who tried and tested and actually understand the product. We also use them as a little bit of a sort of advisory for customers when they get into more detailed technical problems, which probably have a lot of money and investment and time behind the application that they're trying to do. Examples of that will be, so if I just go to authorized partners up the top here, example of a authorized applicator is Busy Diggers. So this is a person called Tony. He operates around the southern Perth area, and you can tell by the picture there that he really is looking at agricultural scale stuff like major roads, gravel roads, major parkways, restaurant-sized parkways, driveways that can be hundreds of meters long. So at the moment, we really just have authorized distributors at Strata Green and then an authorized applicator who's Busy Digger. We then have as extra information, so this is supplementary. I'm just going to lead you in through to what you can self-service as much as you like. We've also got customer stories where some products have customers like yourself. They could be commercial customers or DIY customers. They're contributing back to the website information around some of the product uses that they've had, some of the successes, some of the lessons that they've had. And they're trying to really just help to educate anyone that's not familiar with the products. And I think, let's face it, most people aren't, around how you could probably go about and better plan to do something that you need to solve a problem for. So have a quick look at that. Last thing around this as well is every quarter, I will review any new submissions. And if they're a good submission, written well with good photography that I think helps a customer like yourselves to understand how to use something that's new to them, I award a $200 voucher that they can use to spend on any products that they like. Okay, so back to the homepage. Here on the homepage, we're not focusing on lots of products. We're only focusing on a couple. So we've only really got 6 products. Soil Stabilizer is the one that we're talking about today. But we do have other ones that are similar to SoilGlu in that you can use it for weight-bearing use cases. So if you have a truck, for instance, and say lay down yards, or you have a haul pack road, something as big as that, you wouldn't use SoilGlu, you'd actually use Polymag. And Polymag, by the name, is polymer mag chloride. So it's a polymer mixed with magnesium chloride at a ratio of 80% magnesium chloride and 20% polymer. And the polymer is actually SoilGlu. So it's a little bit of SoilGlu mixed with a lot of magnesium chloride, which is basically, for those that don't know about it, if you're not in the dust control industry, it's basically a really hydroscopic, so it draws moisture out of the air into the magnesium chloride liquid because it's a liquor. And when you apply it out onto any surface road, doesn't matter what the surface is, you don't have to worry about mixing it in. You can just spray it directly on top. It will sit there and wet the soil. And then throughout the day, it will still be effective, even if it's a hot day. And then overnight, when you get some sort of moisture in the air, it'll reabsorb moisture from the air and reset that top surface coat so that it constantly recycles itself. The only problem with mag chloride is that it might be easy to apply, but it's a little bit more expensive to buy. And if you have a massive rain event, it'll wash it out. So that's just something to consider about that. Back to SoilGlu. Just some updates around what we're doing with the product availability It's not available in 200 anymore. We've taken that away. We've decided that 200 litres in a drum, it's basically the same price as selling it in 20 litres. And then the customer's got more flexibility with how they use those drums. There's also the issue with the 200 litre drum where, okay, if you have a customer's received one, do you have the equipment to decant properly or to pump it out? And often the answer is no. So we've just decided to probably removing 200 litres outright and just go straight to 220 litres. So you'd get 10 times 20 litre drums in replacement for a 200 litre single drum. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try to go into a little bit more around the product information and then go into a process share. So for those that don't really look at the product documentation, good news is that what's described on this page, so all of this information on this page is the same as what's in the product sheet. And it's about the most basic information that we can give you without having to go into more of a technical discussion with you. Because if you come to me and you say, oh, how much do I need for this type of application in this area, I have to ask questions like, well, what's the soil particle size distribution as a rough guide? Is it really fine? Is it fine, medium, and coarse? Is it just coarse? And that really affects the recommendation around how to use the product. You might say, well, I'm doing it in winter. Well, okay, that's an issue into itself, because for this product to set, it's essentially a SoilGlu, which is why it's called that. For it to set, it's not a chemical reaction like cement. It's actually just the water-based solvent, the water component. It's a water-soluble polymer. When the water-based solvent evaporates out, it sets, and it sets irreversibly. So once it dries out, it will set hard. So people will say in winter, well, can I do it in 0 degrees? Well, obviously not, because the water won't evaporate out and it will never set. You could do it in a day where it's a good temperature, but it's going to be really heavily raining. That's a real bad thing to do, because you can actually dilute and wash it out. And you might say, well, I'm going to do it in a 44-degree day. Well, that's the opposite of what 0 degrees is. And that just means that it will basically start to set the moment you start playing with it. So one of the other caveats around what I'm going to talk about is all about, do you have the right type of soil, and are you doing it in the right type of environmental conditions? Because if you don't do it in that, you're going to have a lot of issues in application. Then the final thought around this would be, if in doubt, or if you're unfamiliar with a product or your application area or your tools and equipment and process generally, do it in a small test. And then from that test, learn what you think you can to then apply it to the large scale application. Okay. Now, without getting Q&A as I'm going, I am willing to listen to Q&A as you go. So I'm just trying to do a shotgun approach here. The basics are, there's two types of, for SoilGlu, there's two types of application methods. One is a surface coat, which means you're basically creating a glad wrap onto a surface by spraying it on with a mix of water. And all you're really doing there is trying to just lock in those first 3, 4, 5 grains in depth. Okay, it doesn't penetrate more than a couple of mil, but it will lock in, like glad wrap, a top sheet of any type of soil. And that's really good for non-weight bearing use cases. So if you're not going to walk on it, if you're not going to drive on it, you need to have a long-term lock-in of soil so you don't have dust. Then in some cases you can actually prevent water erosion. Then I'd use the surface method, which is documented on our website and in the product information sheet. And I'll also share that in the process shortly. But the idea is, for Western Australia particularly, if you're building a new house, for instance, and it's been cleared completely and someone's put the house up and you're about to get the keys, or you do get the keys, and you're left with the sandpit because you haven't gone with the landscaping package, whilst you're getting grass to grow and all the rest of it, you can easily do a surface treatment with SoilGlu, lock it in so you don't get all the sand throughout your house. And that will last indefinitely until soil grows through it, or until you end up walking or tramping all over it and breaking up the surface crust. So that's the surface treatment in a nutshell. Then the foundation treatment is really trying to address things which are weight bearing. So surface treatment is non-weight bearing. Foundation treatment is about weight bearing. So foundation means, making it to depth. We have to mix it into depth. So we'll call the surface treatment pour on because that's as simple as it is, but the foundation treatment is mix and compact. And that's pretty descriptive of what you've got to do. You've got to get the right type of soil distribution. So you want to have sub 10 mil. You don't want it to be, you can have higher than that. You can have inch size aggregates in there, but it can't be many. And you want to have most of it being somewhere between fine size of sand and a couple of them up to small pebbles in a nice distribution curve for a foundation treatment. That means that the soils are nicely able to fill each other's porous spots and create good basic structure just in the soil grains themselves. Then what you want to do is that you basically get, starting with about 2% volume to volume, 2% soil glue, you start to then apply that into the volume of the soil that you're treating. So for every 1 meter cubed of the soil, you need roughly 20 liters for treating it. Okay, and that's the rule of thumb. It's not guaranteed based on the variables I said at the start of all this, or the caveats. You need to be aware that you need to do testing, because some soils, if they're finer or coarser, wouldn't have more or less surface area, and you'll need to have more or less volume to make sure that everything's properly coated. Because in the end, it's the coating of those soils touching each other with good distribution, because they're backfilling and touching each other in all the porous spots, that allows the water to evaporate out and then set it hard like a nice paver. And that's what you're going for. Okay, so if you can get to that point, you're going to have a really strong product and you can drive on it with a vehicle. So the basics of it, again, what's your use case? Is it weight bearing or non-weight bearing? Do you have the right soil for this? Is a sensible check. Do you have the right weather? That's a sensible check. And then, do you have the right equipment and experience to know how to do the job properly? Because in the end, you are putting a lot of time and money into doing this in the first place. Okay, so just give us a sec. I'm going to share another screen, a process model, which I'm going to share. Okay, so what we're seeing here is basically exactly what I've been talking about. So this is the decision process that I think that it's good for people just to be familiar with. So we've got here, do you need a surface treatment or a foundation treatment? And the use cases are properly defined in this grey box on the left or right. I'll just move this out of the way. So here it says dust control, oil erosion control, landscape veneering. That's good for pour-on, basically non-weight bearing. And on the right, alfresco areas, pathways, garden steps, driveways, BMX tracks. You might have heard of companies like Three Chilies that operates in Perth. They do a lot of BMX tracks with this product. So they do it very successfully and they get good contracts from it. But they've also got a lot of experience and have worked out, I think, maybe a slightly proprietary approach to it. So they won't necessarily tell me their secrets, but they do use our product and they do it in a way that really works for them. So if it's non-weight bearing, it's definitely going to be pour-on. You need to know the surface area. You need to go for roughly 1 litre per 10 square meters, and that's a rule of thumb again. If you've got trouble areas, you might want to add increased application in that troubled area. So if you've got bull dust, or if you think it's, I don't know, subject to more water erosion than it is to dust, then you just need to adjust that. If you think it's going to rain, definitely stop. You need to make sure you get your equipment. You mix it roughly 1 part to 5 of water, and you pour it on roughly one part of the actual ingredient against 10 meters squared, or 6 liters per 10 meters squared. Clean your equipment, simple as just rinsing it off with water. If it's really sticky because it starts to set, you need to scrub it with something a bit more like a scourer. You can by the way, you can pre-coat your equipment with lanolin. So you can get that sheep oil in a spray from Bunnings. And if you think you've got a piece of equipment that's going to be exposed to this over a long period and you don't want to have to worry about getting it off, you can peel it off, but you can pre-spray it with lanolin spray oil. And then when you apply it and it dries off, you can just peel it off. It just comes straight off like a second skin. Okay, so that's one way that you can help to keep your stuff clean. Next is don't use the area until it's fully dry. Sense test is how long does it take for it to dry? I can't say. That's another variable. What's the temperature? When did you apply it? Is it windy? Is it in the shade or not? If it's not in the shade, well, you might not end up, if it's in the shade, you might not get it drying. If it's windy, it'll dry really quick. It just evaporates the water off. And then just monitor and apply when necessary. So that's for the use case for the pour on or the surface treatment. It's really quite straightforward. And then for the foundation treatment, which I think is the one that most people are having questions about, is you'll need to work out, you can go to the technical people that we might have, say the authorized applicator. So if you come to me and I say, I don't really know the answer to that, that's too heavy duty, I'll defer it to Tony at Busy Diggers. And if he's available, he'll talk through what he thinks is the right method to succeed in solving the problem that you have. Okay, so he can help with that. We determine the suitability of the soil. We will check if it's too coarse. If it's got way too many coarse materials, we will stop. We'll ask you to either add more fines or some other distribution adjusting soil. We'll determine the use case application depth. So if you've got to walk on it, you can be anywhere from 50 mil to 80 mil is good for walking. And that also depends on the material that you use. If you've got to drive on it, we think anything over 100 mil. If you're going to do a road train or some really heavy piece of equipment like a truck, then it should be 150 mil. But in that case, I think it's too risky and I'd rather recommend taking polymag, using polymag as a solution. Okay, you can measure the soil volume, so that's just length by width by depth based on the recommendations there, and just account for roughly 2% starting. I've got SoilGlu written there, by the way, but SoilGlu and Glue One is the exact same product. It's just been rebranded. So don't be worried about that. It's exactly chemically the same. Okay, it's just a different label goes on it, a different part in the process of logistics. Okay, use case is make sure that you do a representative test. So do your small area test. You can either make a puck, or you can do a bucket test as well. If you want to take a sample of your soil, mix it in 2% with the recommended amount of water, compact it down and let it dry. See if it comes out like a paver like you want. If it's crumbly, there's something wrong there. It's either got the wrong soil or you haven't added enough, something like that. Again, stop if it's raining. Collect your equipment, pre-water the base. So when you have, if you imagine like a piece of concrete that's just missing, we've got to backfill and make that up with the soil glue and water before it dries. On the base of what you're going to apply on, just pre-wet it. You can even pre-wet it with a very, very, very dilute version of the product with water. Then you mix the product together based on the normal recommended ratio. Then you mix it in with the soil, and you want to get to a point where the soil's, when you mix it with the soil, you don't want it to be slipping through your fingers. If you pick it up, you want it to stand structurally up, look a bit like a snowball. So it actually has enough tackiness together that it has its own structure, but you don't want it to be that wet that it's sloppy and it will fall through your fingers. Okay, so that's the sort of consistency you want to go for. You need to then level it out, and you can level it out. You can actually do this in a bunch of different ways depending on your equipment, but you level it out, contour it the way that you want, compact it and contour it in the way that you want, clean up your equipment and let it dry. And again, how long it takes to dry, mix and compact is pretty deep drying, so you might need a couple of days. In winter, it might need a week. In summer, it can be as quick as a day. Okay, so those are the two methods. If you're going to do mix and compact and you're wondering, well, a DIY, I don't have heavy equipment, how do I do it? Well, I've done it myself using a lasagna method. And basically that means that, you set your area out, you have your soil in, say, a trailer. I have my soil glue pre-measured, I've got my water available from the hose. And all I'm doing is in a bucket, I'm batch mixing my soil glue with the water in a bucket, and then I'll get the soil from the trailer, and then I wheelbarrow it out to the area I'm applying, and I'll put it down no more than an inch thick. Just sort of smear out the soil, and then I'm just pouring on. I'm using the pouring on method on top of that inch thick soil, and then I rake it in. So I mix it with a rake, and then I repeat. I just repeat that over and over again until I get it up to the height that I want it to be, and that's why I'm calling it the lasagna method. And then when you when you compact it, it squeezes all the sand together and forces all the void spaces together, and anything that's or the extra liquid that would seem, it seems too dry at that point. When you compact it, all that water squeezes out and it actually wets it off evenly. So it's a really good way to make sure that you can do it with just basic garden equipment. That's how I do it if I was DIY, if it wasn't too big an area. And then if it was a large area, I'd want to have anything like a bobcat. Like a bobcat, you can mix with bobcat shovel, and you can flatten it with the bobcat shovel, and you can also then go over with industrial compactor. Okay, so those are the two sort of extremes methods. If you're doing the second one and you want help, I'd really recommend that you reach out to someone like myself, and I can get you in touch with Tony at Busy Diggers, or you can use the authorized partners section of the website and just look him up yourself. Okay, but just another caveat there: if you're a competitor to him, he might not help you. All right, so that's basically what I was going to talk about. I think that covers most of the agenda, and I think there's plenty of time for questions if people are on the call that want to answer, have some Q&A.
Yeah, we're still waiting for that. So for all the attendees, they're actually with us and joining live. You're more than welcome to ask questions. Even the most technical one, we'll try to answer that. But while waiting for everyone to send through their question, I was actually wondering about one thing. I remember 3 weeks ago, because I know you're not currently in WA, Tyson. 3 weeks ago, it was like hot the whole, I don't know, 2-3 weeks, like super hot, almost like over 40. And then suddenly it rained. Just one day, just one day it rained. So
Yep.
obviously when the rain can be, forecasted, then it's perfect. It's something that we can work around it, reschedule and so on. But what happens when, let's say, I believe doing the treatments taking sometimes more than one day, several days. I've been in a site one time doing filming. What happens when we're halfway, or maybe we're already starting the treatment and then it rains, then, or maybe what if we do it and, we actually do the application in 2 different days and then halfway through it rains? Like, what is the standard procedure? What would people do in that situation?
I think it'd only be as practical as what comes up in your experience. But let's just say that was me, I'd be trying to make sure that I had accurate forecast around probabilities of rain. If it's light rain or medium rain and it's not constant prolonged rain, it's not a problem. But if it's a deluge, and you get like a deluge coming down, and you know that it's affecting, it's basically turning your treatment area into more of a slurry. It's oversaturated the area. It's going to wash out the active ingredient, and you're going to end up with a pretty weak outcome. You'll still get some gluing action, but it'll be weak. If you've done it in a day and it's been hot and it's sort of half set and then it rains, it just means that it's gone soft again. And it just has to re-evaporate. It's not gonna affect it. The product is irreversibly set only when all the water evaporates out. So that's about 2-3% moisture content is naturally what's usually around soil. So when that evaporates, you'll end up with a puck. Well, if you hit a sample off and it turned into a puck, you could put that in a tub of water and leave it there for a week, pull it out, it's still a puck. It's not going to go soft again. Okay, so that's what I meant by irreversibly sets. Except for it has that vulnerability between when you've applied it and setting, you don't want it to get washed out or oversaturated by some sort of water.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. And I think it's almost like project per project, case per case situation as well, isn't it? Like when it comes to applying.
It's part of the planning. I think it's part of the planning. And the point of that process here that I'm sharing on the screen is really just to help people be aware of all the different parts of the planning that they need to be aware of, like making sure you got the equipment, you know how to use it, you've got the right amount, you've got the right soil, you're not going to be affected by bad weather. And if you don't have the answers to that, to reach out to people that might have the answers to that, like authorized applicators. And then just getting to the point where you're familiar with it, you know how to use it, and it becomes if you're a business particularly, it becomes a new capability that the business has, or a new service that the business has. Right. So you can sit there and say, I can either do this for you as a customer, or I'll do all of it. Like I'll either do all of it from scratch, or the customer says, I've got the product, I know what to do. Can you just come in manually do the mixing? That they might ask you to do that too, but it depends. I think the customers themselves don't quite understand that this product is out there. And I think a lot of the people that are coming in as trades and commercial users of it, some are really advanced with it. And I think they're getting really good customer base from it. and others just slower. And it just means that, they'll need to come to it in their own time.
Yeah, well, John just sent through, not actually a question, just want to make sure, would we be able to get these SoilGlu applications sheets sent to us after the webinar? Maybe also a couple others that we can send through for information?
Yep, no worries. I'm just going to say,
Yeah.
So I've said, yeah, no problem. I'll send it. Plus, it's also on the website, so you can always see it on the website. It's linked. It's linked literally under the product documents, but I'll send it as well. There's an environmental assessment also, since you've raised it, on that website, and that's basically saying that it's a non-dangerous, environmentally friendly product, unlike resin, which is quite hazardous and tricky to use. This is a water-based version of that, and it's non-toxic to marine species, ponds, any types of plants. Plants will grow through it. So if you want, you can put seed on the ground and then soil surface treatment over the top of it. And when it rains, those seeds will just come through. They'll just come straight through. So that's a way that you can do it. If you were building a house and you had a sand pit, you can lock it down, put seeds underneath, and they'll just go straight through. Then we have a SDS, a safety data sheet, and that's really quite generic, but what it's saying is what I've just said about the environmental assessment as well, is it's non-toxic, non-dangerous. It's not going to affect anything that comes in contact with it. You just only want to be aware of doing things like over excessive contact with it. So if you've got gloves around, wear gloves. If you've got goggles, wear goggles. You don't want stuff in your eyes, even if it's non-toxic, like generic things like sand. You don't want sand in your eyes. So same thing, you don't want SoilGlu. Just be aware of stuff like that. Just keep common sense.
How do people know whether they should go to Polymag or SoilGlu? If it's a more heavy use, then you would recommend Polymag, but how do you even determine that?
Cost is a big part, but also the ease of applications and other parts. So Polymag, instead of applying 1 litre per 10 square meters like you would with SoilGlu, Polymag is about 1.5 litres every square meter. Okay, so you basically have to apply, let's just say, about 7 or 8 times the amount of active ingredient per meter squared. And then Polymag is, so therefore, like, Polymag is cheaper per litre, but when you have to times it by the extra volume, you have to, so it's cheaper per litre to buy, but the application rate is much higher. So it ends up being a bit more expensive, but on the product side. But the application side is, you don't have to, if you want to do a foundation treatment with SoilGlu, you'd have to do mix and compact, which means you need heavy equipment. You need to prep the surface. You need to apply it heavily. You have to mix it in, and then you have to grade it if it's large scale applications like, say, a heavy haulage road. You wouldn't necessarily want to use SoilGlu on a heavy haulage road. You might use it just to stabilize some of the grains in the soil, and that's about it. You don't want it to look like a paver. But with Polymag, you don't have to do any of that prep. You can just come through with Polymag and spray it directly onto the surface of the road and drive on it instantly. Okay, you're not doing anything, just pouring it on and driving on it. And then that is effective up until the first heavy rain. So if you do it at the start of dry season, you should get through nearly the entirety of that dry season with just one application. You might need to do a second top-up depending on how heavily the area is being used and how much spot raining might have happened through that. But usually you should be able to get most of the way through dry season and then have to redo it after wet season because it's been washed out. It's water soluble. Okay, but you don't need to put a water cut on that afterwards. You put it down once, no water cuts after that. Okay, and this is trial and tested. This is actually used extensively in the mining industry. Okay, so they do this on haul pack roads. They're 80-ton machines with hundreds of tons worth of stuff in the back, and it's still effective on those roads. The other advantage is that it tightens up the surface of the road and makes it a bit stronger. So it's less prone to potholing and other issues like that. So you can impact your maintenance intervals to maintain those types of roads. So basically, if you're heading towards civil, industrial scales type stuff, I'd use Polymag. But you might find in the back of like a business, if you've got like a dusty area in the back, you might find Polymag is also an easy solution. It's much smaller quantities.
Yeah, that's very good information. And if any of the attendees also and all the registrars that will catch up later on have any question for both products, feel free to email us info@stratagreen.com.au, as well as we have a landing page for SoilGlu. stratagreen.com.au/SoilGlu. All the documentation is there, but as well in saying that I will send through all the PDF docs as well as promised to John and everyone else. So after this webinar, you will receive that as well as the recording, so you can pass it on to somebody else, and for those who missed it live today. Well, before we close, Tyson, anything else you would like to add before we wrap it up?
With that customer story section, Strata Green would be, the people that give you that voucher. We honor it as you being a customer of Strata Green, and then you can get that voucher and maintain that relationship with Strata Green. But any submissions to the customer stories for those that have done something and think it's worth sharing, I'm willing to give anyone that does that $200 worth of product when it's a good submission.
The landing page takes us straight to the customer story section that is shown right now.
Share your story.
Yeah, let's do that. And if you have any issues in crafting a story, feel free to reach out to me. Actually, I'm actually very I love this type of project. So the one that I just shared when we do the filming, it's a real project. It's a residential though. I would love to be involved in, also commercial project would be very amazing. We can even do content together. Reach out and email me, marketing@stratagreen.com.au. We'll be more than happy to be connected and chat and what we can do together. Let's do that. I think that would be amazing. And once again, thanks, Tyson, and thanks for ProZyme team that have been supporting Tala and Mason. And yeah, we'll see you again on the next webinar. Thank you so much.
Cheers. And thanks for joining,
Have a
everyone.
good day. See ya.
See ya.